there's a critique of Zionism that's going to be very hard to make, but it's easier to make today than it was 20 or 30 years ago in broader circles. And there's a critique of Israel, and there's an argument for Palestinian rights that is actually easier in 2020 than it was in 1980 or 1983 when I came back to the United States from Beirut. So I think there's actually even some opening on that. And the reason that they're terrified and that they're slandering us with this ludicrous anti-Semitism charge is because they're really afraid of an open debate of these issues. They understand that there's a contradiction between some of the essential values of Zionism and the essential values of a liberal democracy. Is that the last
question here?
Maybe that'll be the last question, the question here, wherever it is. I can't see. Yes?
I'm Parker Hardy, and I'd like to take advantage of 30 seconds of my status as a Jew to blow the bubble on anti-Semitism, because it doesn't apply to any of the activism that has been done in support of the BDS movement. Anti-Semitism, the historic definition of anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews based on their identity as Jews, period. And what is now being shoved into the definition, because it's just not enough, to do the trick for AIPAC and the Jewish Federation, is to add criticism of the state of Israel into the definition of what it means to be an anti-Semite. So you're an anti-Semite if you criticize the state of Israel. Well, that, of course, would violate, if you're an anti-Semite for criticizing the state of Israel, then you know, the entire thing crumbles into dust, because that's a completely unconstitutional definition. Criticism of any state for any reason is the highest, most highly protected form of speech there is under the Constitution. It's just frivolous, but there's a lot of political and societal power behind it. But if you can explain it that simply, it really crumbles. And you should not be afraid, because what we do is not anti-Semitic.
Right. And that's when I say lawyer up, I mean get clear, simple explanations like that. And those explanations have to be made to college administrators. Those explanations have to be made in public forums on university campuses. Those explanations have to be made every time this ridiculous, frivolous charge is made.
One more.
One more. Fadlan.
My name is Fadlan Ramadan, and I'm reading the first page of your book, and you have a quote from the newspaper Palestine. You know, it was kind of early on, at least, you guys kind of a mouthpiece for the articulation of a distinct Palestinian nationalism.
Right.
You feel that Palestinian nationalism, that national consciousness, that sort of cognizance was the result of a sort of reactionary movement to Zionism, because it kind of emerges on the same time, or is that really an outgrowth of a particular kind of Palestinian cultural and political disposition that was sort of organic, that emerges at the sort of fall of the Ottoman Empire?
Right. That's a really good question. And it's a question that was the focus of a book I wrote called Palestinian Identity. And I touch on it here in this book. No, Palestinian identity is like most national movements. It develops as a result of overlapping senses of identity that change over time. But it also develops in response to the other. And it wasn't only the Zionist other. There were various others, imperialism, the Ottoman state as it became more Turkish nationalist. I argue in Palestinian Identity, and I touch on it here, that Palestinian nationalism is not just a reaction to Zionism. And Palestinian Identity has all kinds of constituents that are made up of pre-existing senses of identity, local identity, family identity, religious identity, attachment to place. Those are there before Palestinian nationalism is there. And they combine, they recombine, together with a reaction to the other and a reaction to circumstances. The partitions, to some extent, help the partitions. The Sykes-Picot and other partitions helped to create the national entities that later on became Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Iraq, Kuwait, and so on and so forth. Those things existed as regions. Those things existed as a sense of identity. They didn't exist as national units. But within them grew up national identities. Now, there's some places that had what I would call stateness for a very long time. Egypt, the sense of Egypt as a place with a state goes before Egyptian nationalism, but it becomes Egyptian nationalism only in the 19th century. And that's true of all nationalism, including Zionism. The great-grandparents of Herzl, the great-grandparents of David Ben-Gurion, did not think of a Jewish state in Palestine. The idea of Jewish sovereignty was foreign to them. The idea that the Jewish people had to return to Palestine would never have occurred to any of them. It's a 19th century modern nationalist idea. They then take Jewish peoplehood and Jewish religious identity and transform it. All national movements do this. In the case of Zionism, it's particularly blatant. In the case of the Palestinians, it's like any other national movement. It develops out of pre-existing senses of identity. And there's a whole book about it called Palestinian Identity, if you want to go further with the topic.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Rachid. I have a few, please allow me, I have a few notes that I have to say to you here. Please, ALNADWA is inviting you to our event next April 8th for a quarterly event. Please note that in Michigan, you don't have to register as a member of the party. All of you can vote on the primary on March 10, regardless of your affiliation with the party, regardless whether you affiliate with the party or not, regardless whether you register or not.
As a Democrat.
That's very important. That's Michigan law. You can register up to the day of the voting, please, of the election. Please remember to vote. In addition, please note that our lecturer's book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, is available this evening at the publisher table upstairs, and he will be happy to sign it.
Thank you.
I do thank every one of you who come here and who defy the weather, because regardless of the weather, we are here to support the Palestine cause. Thank you.
Book signing will be upstairs in the lobby. The book is $30 plus tax. The book, the store upstairs, they accept credit card. Dr. Rachid AlKhalidi will be upstairs to sign the books. Thank you. We have an announcement from the community.
Hi everyone, really quick, if you really enjoyed this, we at the museum, there's going to be a film screening for Brooklyn, inshallah. And the director, Ahmed Mansour, who's a Palestinian documentarian, will be here. So please join us at 5:30 on March 7th.